Hello everyone, I'm Helen Williams. I'm part runner A6014 and event director of Harrogate Junior Parkrun here in the UK, and alongside Vassos Alexander, I'm the co-presenter of the free weekly timed podcast. Before we start, I'd just like to recommend that after this conversation people check out the many parkrun social media channels in the UK and across the world, as well as subscribing to the various parkrun podcasts out there. You'll find me on the free weekly time podcast, but there's also with me now Parkrun Adventurers and the 9:30 Club, to name a few others. So we are going to chat to Jesse Dufton, and if you have any questions for him, please do put them in the comments below, and the very wonderful Kirsty from HQ will pull them all out and we'll pop them at the end of this Q&A, and we'll put them to Jesse and ask him all of your questions. So without further ado, Jesse, we are joined by your good self. While Jesse has climbed all of his life, he only became aware of paraclimbing as a competitive sport in September 2017 and was then selected for the British team in early 2018. Jesse has rod cone dystrophy, which is a genetic condition, and he was born with approximately 20% of central vision with large blind spots. From this drastically low baseline, Jesse's vision has further deteriorated, and he can now only distinguish between light and dark in an extremely restricted field of view. Recently, Jesse starred in the documentary Climbing Blind, aired on BBC4, which followed his attempt to lead climb in trad style the Old Man of Hoy. So Jesse, welcome to today's question and answer.
Thank you for having me.
It's a year ago today. We were just talking about that just before we went live. A year ago today, you are still on the Old Man of Hoy as we speak, which is a year. It's a year today.
Yeah, so I think at this exact moment, a year ago, I think I would probably be like on the traverse pitch, probably just about to go into the hardest section of the Old Man of Hoy. This exact moment. So,
have you been climbing today?
I haven't been climbing. I have had the joy of work today. So
the joy of work.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing that your weekends are pretty much taken up with climbing if you're working through the week. Let's talk about the documentary. At the end of it, which is a bit odd that we're spinning all the way to the end, but you do say something really powerful in it, and you finish on it, and you say that I'm not disabled, I'm blind and able. How important do you think it is that we don't refer to people as being disabled?
So I know that quite a lot of people get very passionate about the way that people are referred to. I'm not necessarily so bothered about the way that people refer to, but the underlying attitude is important, I think. Like everyone gets dealt a certain hand. Obviously, like a hand of cards. Obviously, in the eye department, my hand wasn't so great, but that doesn't mean that it's any different from anyone else. You know, they might have other challenges in their life. It's just everyone's the same. Got challenges to get on with. We're just doing the best we can.
Yeah, I think that really comes across in the documentary, that mindset, and I think it comes across in almost the flippancy of your parents, which is your relationship with your parents is wonderful, you know. And when they talk about when they realised that your eyesight wasn't as good as, you know, their eyesight was, they're like, oh yeah, now we realise why you couldn't do such a thing. But obviously they're kind of just get on with it, Jesse, kind of attitude. Sounds like it's something that's just allowed you to just get on with life as normal.
I think so. I think that, when I look back, I'm really grateful for my parents. The way they just never really saw it as something that needed to have special accommodations made for my lack of sight. I think that my dad covers it quite well in Climbing Blind. He makes the point that kids have to take risks when they're growing up because that's how we learn. And I think that if you wrap kids up in cotton wool and don't allow them to take any risks, you take that opportunity to learn away from them. Obviously there's risks and there's risks, but I think that's a really important lesson. It's certainly something that figured heavily in like the person I wound up becoming.
Yeah, and it's a really brave thing to do as a parent, because I think, you are the most treasured thing that a parent can have. And so to be able to see that, putting you in anything else other than cotton wool would hold you back is amazing, in that way. Can you describe for people what your visual impairment is like or was like and how it deteriorated?
Yeah, sure. So I have a genetic condition. So it's been with me since birth. And basically, as you said earlier, when I was born, I had like about 20% of central vision. So no peripheral vision. It's not even 20% of total vision. It's 20% of central vision.
Okay.
And what that means is if you go, when you went to the eye test, my best ever result was I could just about guess at stuff on like the third line, which isn't great really. And from there, the light sensitive cells at the back of my eye are slowly dying off.
Okay.
So it's basically just been a gradual decline from there on in. And I'm at the point now where basically I don't have any useful sight left. So, I mean, I'm holding my hand up here. I know it's a foot in front of my face. I can't see it. Like,
okay.
If I wiggle it around, I might be able to tell that there's a bit of movement, but there's no way I could count my fingers.
Okay.
The best analogy I've got is imagine you're looking down a drinking straw and the drinking straw's got, I don't know, 6 layers of cling film over the end. Basically, you can kind of tell whether or not the end of the straw is light or dark, but that's about it.
Okay.
And when I'm climbing, that means that I can't see any of the handholds. I can't see any of the footholds. I can't see where.
Your hand.
Well, I can't see my hand. So where am I going to put it? And I can't tell, see any of the opportunities to place gear. And when I'm placing it and when I've placed it, I can't look at it and tell if it's any good or not.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And I think, and we'll get into that a bit later on for people who might not understand the nuances of climbing, because actually what you did when you climbed the Old Man of Hoy traditionally, and we'll talk about that, it is amazing. But before that, can you just give us the origins of your climbing? Because I know if you've not seen the documentary, everybody must watch the documentary. It's wonderful, but there are some lovely photos and a bit of video footage, I think, of you with your parents, and you're climbing, and you're about 2, aren't you? And you're at the foot of something. So you clearly, it's in your family already. It is something you've done for a very long time.
So I like to joke that I didn't really have much choice about getting into climbing. Yeah, as you said, my parents took me when I was 2, I think, and I had a particularly epic pair of stripy red and yellow trousers. Molly's tried to find those in a men's size large. Unfortunately, she hasn't managed it, but it was something that I always did. And my dad was a keen climber, and he kind of taught me right from the word dot, really. And I think I led my first route when I was 11.
Wow.
And then I would climb with my dad at weekends. We used to live down, for most of my life growing up, we lived in Winchester, just north of Southampton. It's not a great location for climbing. There's nothing really close by. So it's not like you can kind of pop out to the crag after work. We'd go away at weekends, but I didn't really get the opportunity to climb that much. And it was only when I went to university that I got the opportunity to kind of climb more regularly. So yeah. So
you've kind of always done it. And, obviously you've gone out on a weekend with your dad, and then, you do go to climbing walls as well. Is that something that have you got quite a few partners to do that with, or is that normally with Molly?
So that I never really went climbing walls with my dad. That's mostly because back in the day there weren't that many climbing walls around. There certainly weren't any in Winchester that were any good. So it was I always learned to climb outside, and then kind of climbing walls are something that only really came in like when I was at university, really.
Yeah.
So I'd go climbing to the climbing wall midweek with all my mates from uni. Since then, that's where I kind of got my group of climbing friends, and obviously I met Molly at university. So anyone who doesn't know, Molly is my wife, and now, and she over time has been brilliant, and as my sight deteriorated, she learned to kind of how to guide me, and it was a step-by-step process. So as my sight slowly dropped off, the level of instruction that she'd give me got slightly more and more detailed.
Yeah, and that comes across so well. It's one of the nicest things, as well as a very inspirational, visual of you climbing. It is wonderful, but being able to see how calm Molly is and how you work together and your communication, and there's a huge part in it, isn't there, where that the guy making the documentary is really aware that she's not even going to be able to help you, because there's a part, isn't there, where you disappear out of view because you have to climb in a certain way. That means she's not even there to be able to help. Let's go into the nuts and bolts of climbing, so that people who are viewing can get some kind of understanding about how amazing it was that you led the Old Man of Hawaii. Because the difference is, for people who think of climbing, if you said what's a traditional climb, somebody might think there's one rope that's already fixed at the top and up you scamper. But it's not that, is it, Jesse?
Doesn't quite work like that, no. So climbing, I always say it's a bit like cycling. There's loads of different kind of sub-disciplines in cycling. In the velodrome, you've got the Kira and the team pursuit. They're all kind of slightly different. And while I do all of them, the main focus of Climbing Blind is about trad climbing, which is traditional climbing. And in most forms of climbing, but especially in trad, you always climb in a pair, and you have a leader who goes up first and a seconder who comes up afterwards. And there's no kind of artificial bolts or anything in the rock. What you do is, as you climb up, you have various bits of gear, kind of things like this, that you can slot into naturally occurring cracks in the rock, and then you can loop the rope through, and that acts as a safety mechanism. It's not there to aid your ascent, it's only there to kind of catch you if you fall off.
That's right.
So when you're climbing up, it's your responsibility as the leader to deal with all the rope work and all the safety aspects. And as a consequence, it's an order of magnitude more difficult to lead something than it is to follow up behind, and you've got the rope above you at that point. So
it's an unbelievable feat that you can do that without being able to see. So if you told somebody to go and lead climb something and they could climb, we chatted yesterday, didn't we? And I've been climbing for a year now, and I couldn't possibly imagine going out and leading something. I might do it in a climbing wall where I feel really, really safe, because I don't have to put any protection in at all. But what you're putting into the rock, Jesse, those cams or whatever you have in your hand there, not only can you not see your hand in front of you, but you don't know what you're putting them into. So you've got this amazing sense, this almost sixth sense, an ability to be able to know that there's a gap, and that you can pick the kind of protection up that you need to put in there, and then slot it into the hole, make sure that it is the right size at all the time you're holding on, so that you can then put the rope in, and it's only then that you're safe in terms of not swinging 100 feet or whatever.
Yeah, so if you fall off when you're on lead, well, the main thing to say is when you're on lead, the rope always goes down from you. And if you were to fall off, the distance you go is related to how long it was since you last looped it through a piece of gear. And it's basically 2 times that distance plus a bit. And the thing that's hard for me mentally is, because I can't see my gear when I clip it, you don't have that mental reassurance that it is good. Now, I'm not saying that my gear is bad, and that, Molly always gives me a kind of a post-match debrief of all my gear, and it's good. I've been done loads of it, but you just don't have that mental reassurance that, you put this piece of gear in, so you're climbing up past your gear. The last piece might be 5 meters behind you, which means you're looking at a 10-meter fall if you were to come off, and you're like, God, is that last bit any good? Because if it wasn't, you'll go down to the next bit.
Yes.
And if that was 10 meters below you, then you're looking at a 20-meter fall. So
and that, of course, that ups the ante, doesn't it? So that makes it, if you're going to do it that way, for anybody who lead climbs, that is a part of it. That's the joy of it, isn't it? Is to be able to go up and put all those things in. But then, you know, when you're sighted and you're putting it in, and you can go, well, that feels, it looks, it's the right hole, it's the right shape, and of course for you have to just put it in there and go, okay, I trust that, to
Trust
mentally, be able to go up to the next bit. I mean, how do you not worry about falling out and it just pulling out of the wall, and then ting ting ting, it all going down the wall in one,
oh dear, I hit the ground. That's quite a hard question to answer. I think it's mostly like kind of the experience. Like, I know that from previous experience my gear is good, even though I can't check it. I just have to have faith in my own abilities. Occasionally I do like kind of double stack it. So if there's the opportunity to place more than one bit, I'll place two, and I'll have a bit of redundancy. So if one of them is rubbish, hopefully the other one will be good. Not that the other one the first one ever is rubbish, but, you know, just as a bit of mental reassurance, really.
And that, you know, and then going back to, you know, having Molly there as your kind of eyes, you know, there's some, like I said earlier, there's some lovely moments in there where she's moving your arms around in a way of, she's kind of giving you her eyes in that visual sense of, there's something here, there's something here, and there's something here. And of course that I think that was in an indoor climbing wall. But for something like the Old Man of Hoy, being able to lead that, your trust in Molly is obviously as solid as anything. I mean, I would let her do anything ever at all. I would trust her implicitly, having never met her. She's the calmest person ever. And I think, you know, even before you get to the Old Man of Hoy, there's a walk, isn't there, that would take the average person about 15 minutes. It's quite scary because there's a drop, isn't there? And there's lots of sketchy moments where everything drops away from you, and the only way to get down there is to walk down there. And of course, you've got to tackle that bit without any ropes, with Molly kind of in front of you as a, you're coming up to a bit now, Jesse, where it's really rocky down, but it's quite a drop. And I mean, as your average person, I'm not quite sure I could cope with walking down there, never mind guiding somebody else down there. And I think that must feel like the most amazing partnership that you've got there together.
I think, certainly Molly and I's relationship is very strong. I mean, it should be said that any time people go climbing with a climbing partner, you're always trusting your life by definition to your climbing partner. That is just part of the package. You have to trust that if you were to fall off, they're going to actually, you know, hold the rope and stop you decking out. That's a fairly fundamental. But obviously, I'm reliant on Molly's eyes for some bits that sighted climbers wouldn't be. And it's mostly kind of the descent. So the Old Man, the descent to it is from the headland to the base of the stack is quite sketchy. As you described, it's a kind of tiny little footpath, and in sections it's fallen away. And if you were to slip, you'd probably die. Let's not beat around the bush. You'd probably die.
You'd probably die.
So yeah, but it's not the worst ones we've done. There have been a few that have been worse than that.
I can't bear it. And you know, so it took you 2 hours, obviously, because you had to do that really carefully, and you had to do it effectively on your own with Molly talking to you before you got to the Old Man of Hoy. What does the climb look like in your imagination? So, you know, when you're at the bottom of the Old Man of Hoy, what do you see in your head?
So it's a good point. I do make kind of because I used to be able to see a bit. I kind of have have a memory of what things look like. So I kind of imagine things in my mind. So if anyone doesn't know, the Old Man of Hoy is 137 metre tall sandstone pillar, and it comes straight up out of the sea off Hoy, which is like in the Orkney archipelago. So I'm not quite sure. It's just this massive kind of rock pillar, really. And the route kind of starts like this and kind of traverses around here, goes up over a big overhang, and then around the corner before finishing up at the top. So I think I have quite a good mental map of it, and obviously the experience of climbing it has kind of been inked into my brain indelibly. So. And
do you feel like that's given your not being able to see it but you can see it in your head, and then obviously having the ability to be able to put the protection in on the way up without being able to see where you're putting it. Do you think that's all of your other senses are heightened? You know, you must have the most amazing spatial awareness. You know, really. Can you feel that that's improved as your sight's fallen away?
Sure, yeah, definitely. So, I mean, the first thing to say is that I can't, in absolute terms, detect anything that other people couldn't. You know,
Okay.
you don't get you don't get any extra information. You've learned to pay attention to it more.
Yeah.
So the big thing is the spatial awareness or the proprioception, which is having like a 3D mental map of you in your surroundings. And I think that's one of my real strengths. Like, as I'm climbing up, if I find a hold for my hand, I'll remember where it is in 3D space. So as I climb a bit higher, I can then remember where that was and use it as a foothold, and I can go straight to it rather than kind of feeling around with my foot. Now, obviously, I'm really selective in the shoes that I use, and I kind of get ones that are really sensitive and I can feel the rock through them, but it's never as good as being able to feel it with your bare skin on your hands.
And one of the things about climbing certain routes is, for people that don't understand climbing, and particularly outdoors, you know, in a climbing wall, they're typically, one route will be graded and it'll be one colour, and the route next to it will be a different colour and there'll be different grades. But of course, when you're out on a piece of rock, there will be a route, and the route that you took will be a certain route that is, you know, what is defined by climbing the Old Man of Hoy. And you can't look at effectively the map of that route before you go up it. And so how do you work out what the best way up that is without, or do you sit and kind of verbally study where you have to go before you're up there? Do you sit with Molly and say...
So we kind of go through the description of the route. So the route is broken up into sections. Each section is called a pitch, and each pitch will have a kind of description. So an example description would be climb the short wall for 3 meters and then follow the scoop up to the right. And I'll remember those kind of instructions so that as I'm climbing up, if I kind of get to the end of a corner, I'll be like, all right, this is the end of the corner. I know I'm going out to the right here, or something like that.
Okay.
And hopefully, for most of the time, we try and pick routes where Molly can see me. As you alluded to earlier, there's this 5th pitch on the Old Man of Hoy where it kind of goes around the tower, and Molly's sat on this side and I'm around here, so she can't see me. And for those, you have to remember the route description and do things like Molly will... I know that I need to traverse out for about 5 meters, so Molly will be keeping an eye on how much rope she's paid out. And when she thinks she's paid out 5 meters of rope, she's like, right, that's 5 meters. If you haven't found something already, you probably need to start thinking about going up now.
That's
stuff like that.
That is amazing. It's really amazing. Are you aware of height?
Yeah, I think so. You're mostly aware of exposure. So the soundscape changes. And the wind changes, so you can feel like kind of the wind blowing up from underneath you. There are sections on the Old Man of Hoy where it's kind of overhanging, so the wind comes up from underneath you, and you can hear the waves crashing below. It's quite atmospheric. So yeah.
And in the traditional way of understanding how far you are off the ground, which would give most people the heebie-jeebies, but even climbers are aware of how far away off the ground. Do you think that not knowing exactly how far you're off the ground makes a difference, or are you just in the moment and you're just climbing and the distance is irrelevant?
So it doesn't. The absolute distance off the ground, I don't think, is really that relevant for me, because as I said earlier, the critical piece of information is how long it was till you placed your last piece of gear, because that's the bit that determines the level of danger. You know, you can be 200, 500, 1,000 meters up, but if you're right next to your gear, if you fall off, basically nothing happens. Whereas if the last piece of gear was 10, 20 meters below you and you were not even sure how good it was, if you were to fall off, you're not going to be having a very good day.
So what made you pick the Old Man of Hoy? Because you've been climbing for ages, and obviously you've been paraclimbing for British Sport and all of the... What made you choose the Old Man of Hoy?
It's pretty cool.
It's pretty cool.
It's pretty cool.
Good answer.
It's an iconic route. So we'd done the Old Man of Stour, which is over on the west coast of Scotland, which is kind of like the Old Man of Hoy's little brother, a couple of years before. And any time where you get to go and climb a sea stack is a grand day out. There's just an extra level of adventure. You've got to get down to the base of the stack. Like on the Old Man of Stour, you've got to like literally swim out to it, and you climb this thing that there's no other way of getting to the top. Well, unless you get a helicopter or something, but that's definitely cheating. So yeah, I think that there's just something special about the extra adventure that's involved in climbing this tower relative to climbing something on a cliff.
I did love the pieces to camera that the professional climbers did, where they're just discovering, oh yeah, he's going to climb the Old Man Hoy. Oh, he's going to lead it. Okay, that brilliant. The dawning realization is wonderful. So let's talk a little bit more about climbing the Old Man Hoy. When you're on it, you say things like, "Oh, I'm getting a bit peckish now," but it's taken quite a long time, and it's obviously it was June, and you had good weather, and it meant that you had a lot of daylight. But you topped out. I don't know what time you got to the top. About
10:10.
10. Yeah. It was a long day. Did you eat on the way up, or were you just so focused?
I had a couple of mini pork pies. Yeah. So I had a bit, but I was still starving when I got to the top.
So was there a point on it where you could just stop and have 2 minutes to actually just take your arms off and concentrate?
Yeah, so kind of I mentioned that it's broken up into kind of 6 pitches. So at the end of each pitch, there's a ledge, but the ledge is no bigger than like kind of this sofa. So you can take the weight off your hands, but it's not like it's not necessarily that comfortable.
No, you're not rolling out a picnic mat for your pork pies, are you? No. And what was the feeling like when you got to the top? I mean, clearly you don't do something like this unless there's, first of all, a sense of the possibility that you might not be able to do it because it's obviously something you wanted to do, but also the sense that you could do it must be really strong as well. So I'm sure you weren't surprised when you did do it, but were there any moments of doubt on the way up?
Yeah, I think you kind of teed me up perfectly. Part of the reason I go climbing is for the challenge and the sense of satisfaction when you do it well. And for something to give you that sense of satisfaction, there's got to be a chance of failure. So you've got to pick stuff that's kind of on the edge of what's possible for you. And yeah, there was no guarantee that I was going to be able to do that. Like the third pitch section called the coffin is really awkward, really quite tricky. That wasn't guaranteed that I was going to be able to do that. So once I was past that section, I think there was a huge sense of relief, and I could kind of kick back and enjoy the climbing. So the last pitch of the Old Man of Hoy is just this brilliant, like kind of an open book corner with the two rock walls on either side, and then like there's a cleft that splits the stack that kind of comes down the middle of this corner. It's really kind of quite a cool rock feature, really.
And of course,
so, yeah.
Molly's coming up behind you, so you'll do a pitch and then Molly will come up, and then you'll do another pitch and Molly comes up. What was that like for her to be able to climb it and know what you've... I mean, she says she can't believe you led it, and she's obviously an amazing climber herself, so that must be such a great feeling. Yeah,
I think I'm never one for overstatement, but I think Molly, appreciated that one. It's a pretty good day out.
I mean, there has to be no competition in that way, does there? And I think that union that you have is really nice. There's the admiration that she has for what you've done, even though she's witnessed it and talked you through it all. As she comes up to feel what that must be like. I
think she doesn't really kind of understand how I do it.
I don't think anybody can understand how you do it. It's so alchemy.
I think she enjoys that like kind of mental thing. It's like Molly's a good climber and she found that hard, and she's like, how would I do that if I couldn't see? And I just don't think it kind of computes.
No, I'm sure it doesn't. we were saying, my husband and I were saying that watching Climbing Blind, there were many parallels between your climb and Alex Honnold in Free Solo. So for people who, I'm sure there are people out there who don't climb, who will have seen Free Solo. It's basically one man, no rope, very large mountain, and he climbs it and doesn't fall to his death, which is obviously a big possibility. But at the same time, in the parallels between you both is that calm and calculated approach to it, because there's obviously just as much danger in you leading the Old Man Ahoy or whatever you lead wherever you go as there is for Alex Honnold slipping and falling to his death. So where do you think that confidence comes from, and can you see that parallel between you and he?
I can kind of see the parallel. I'm not sure exactly where the confidence comes from. I think large part of it is the kind of the mental aspect is really, really important. I mean, one thing that I say that kind of goes across all things, be that climbing or park run or whatever activity you're doing, you've got to believe that it's possible before you start. If you think something is impossible, it definitely is. You've lost that mental battle before you've even begun. So the first step of me kind of being able to do the Old Man Ahoy is I had to believe that I was capable of doing it. Not guaranteed, because, it wouldn't be a challenge if I knew the result before I started, but I had to believe that there was a chance that it was possible. And then the second part is you've got to have a plan for how you're going to do it. And, a large part is anticipating the things you're going to find hard and finding workarounds beforehand.
Okay.
So that you can, if you've already solved the problem before it's occurred, that's a load easier than suddenly being halfway up a cliff and going, oh my God, I can't hear Molly. What do I do now?
Yes. Yes.
So,
yeah. And so I guess, and going into that a little bit deeper, one of the biggest barriers to participation is often mindset, isn't it? And the fact that, making that first step out of the door, whether it's for a run or to take the jump and go and lead an amazing climb somewhere, that having a roadmap, isn't it, really, is what you're saying is let's not have any surprises jumping out. I think it's great that you can say, well, what are the things? Because I think we run away or hide from the things that we think we're going to be so scared of. I'm going to be last. I'm going to fall. But actually, what you're saying really is, say them. Say, where are they?
Yeah, for me, I mean, everyone's different, but for me, I kind of build a little list of, the things that might happen, and kind of work through all those scenarios. You have your decision tree that branches out. Okay, if this happens, what am I going to do? If this happens, what am I going to do? And in terms of, you're absolutely right, often the hardest thing is that initial deciding to do it. And in some ways it's the easiest thing in the world, because all you have to do is you just have to change your mind. I am going to do this rather than I'm not going to do this. But in other words, some people really struggle with that, and that's the hardest thing in the world.
Yeah, to actually just
to commit.
Yes, committing is really difficult. And I think with climbing and also with starting something, isn't it? It's the second the whistle goes, or the 3, 2, 1 go, or you're off leading. You're kind of on your own, aren't you? You're doing it. You're in the arena, as they say. Let's go to some viewer questions. Jesse, we'll see what people are interested in finding out from you. So Karen Jen says, do you do any other sports apart from climbing?
I don't get the chance to do many at the moment because I'm part of the GB Paraclimbing team, and that means I've got to train and I've got a full-time job. So
there are no other sports, are there, Jesse?
So I've done quite a lot in the past. So I've done quite a lot of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, quite a lot of skiing. I used to play rugby when I was at school. Done a bit of cycling in the past. So yeah, but at the moment, just time commitments. I don't have enough time to commit to all of them.
Yeah, that is hard, isn't it? Finding space for everything. Roger Shiver says, what's the biggest, scariest fall you've taken when you've been leading?
So people
always want to go, don't they?
So I went to university in Bath, and there's a quarry down there called Fairy Caves, and there's an E1 in there that called Bad to the Bone that I fell off, and my top piece of gear ripped out, and I wound up, I don't know, I can't remember how far it was now. It felt like a long way, but it probably wasn't. But I wound up upside down in a tree. That wasn't ideal. But dusted myself off, pulled myself up, had a quick sit down on the tree, and then got back on it and finished it off.
Carl Horsley says, "Hi Jesse, hope you're well. Enjoying following your progress. When do you think you'll be back on the mat?"
Well, depends. Yeah, so I would love to go back on the mat. He's referring to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Yeah.
When I get the chance, I think is the answer. All my competitions for this year have been cancelled, which was hard going, into lockdown, having worked really hard over the winter to get strong for competitions, and then suddenly it's all cancelled. So in some ways it would be the ideal time now, but obviously martial arts aren't really that easy to do socially distanced, so we'll see.
And in fact, actually, we haven't really talked about climbing in lockdown, because climbing gyms have closed, and obviously for a long time you couldn't travel anywhere. So what did that mean for you with training, and what does that mean for people who are, climbing, haven't got the luxury of, of Adam Ondra's amazing Bouldering, his spray wall in his house, unless you've got one, of course.
I don't have I've got some training kit in my garage, but I don't have like a full home wall, unfortunately. So yeah, it was hard. Like I said, I worked really hard over the winter to get myself into a good condition. I'm sure that everyone's been working on preparing for a race or whatever, and suddenly that race is cancelled, and there was obviously kind of quite a bit of a mental battle there, but I decided that I was going to set myself a target. So for me, my absolute finger strength is a relative weakness.
Okay.
My endurance is pretty good for my grade, but my absolute finger strength is not as good as it could be. So I decided that through lockdown I was going to work on that, and if I can come out of lockdown with having made an improvement in that one small area of my climbing, I'll count that as a win.
Because I think, for people who are watching who are climbers and who are just interested in sport in general, and we'll have parkrun communities in there, one of the big things about missing out on being able to parkrun with friends and family and just basically getting together is the mental health side of it. And of course, for climbing, for runners, you can go out for a run. We've never not been able to go out and run, and of course, for quite a long time there has been a point where you weren't allowed to travel to climb anywhere. And has there been a part of being outside and climbing that you used for mental health, or did you just, like you say, concentrate on, okay, I can't control that, I'm going to do the thing and get finger strength back?
So I definitely think that all forms of exercise, I quite kind of meditative. Certainly when I'm climbing, you are not thinking about what was happening in the office or whatever. It's something that demands total focus. So that's quite beneficial from a mental health perspective. You are not worrying about anything else. You are thinking about how good is this hold, and what's next. Did I find it hard in the first 8 weeks of lockdown? I think a bit. But I'm very cognizant of the fact that I'm very lucky. I've got a garage that's got stuff that I can do. One of our friends lives in a micro flat in London, one bed. I'm very grateful for what I have, I think.
Brilliant. Okay. Stephen Fay says, do you carry out any stretching before and after climbing?
I probably should, but if truth be told, I do actually. No, I do whenever I train. I do a warm up, so I use some of those TheraBands to do things like warm my shoulders up. So yeah, and when I'm climbing outside, I'll usually try and do kind of some easier climbing to kind of get my body warmed up before I get onto either the crux pitch or
Okay. Mohammed Farah says, hi Jesse, do you run?
I don't run that much, really. I mean, I did live in Holland for a year, and there's not much climbing in Holland, so I did do a bit of running there. but I wouldn't class myself as a great runner, if I am honest.
You do sound like you have great overall fitness, though. Della Horton says, watching your documentary was inspirational. What's your advice to other people out there thinking about taking on an incredible personal challenge of their own?
I think probably plan it out in your head and work out where the difficulties are going to be and what you can do in advance to make it easier. So maybe a good example of that is in 2017 we went to Greenland on an expedition, and when it's minus 15 outside, everything becomes hard. You do not want to be doing things like measuring out like stuff to have for lunch. So you do a whole load of preparation beforehand, which is hard work at the time, but makes the overall goal easier. So if you're going to be preparing for something, try and kind of simulate it in your head and work through what the hard bits are going to be. And if you can kind of prepare yourself for those, when they come around, you'll be in a much better place. Amazing.
I love that advice. You need to tell it to my husband, because he's last minute. He is lastminute.com. Sam Tully says, in your documentary, you have such a special relationship with Molly. Apart from climbing together, what are your other hobbies and how do you unwind?
By going climbing. What are our hobbies? I think mostly it's about going climbing together. I mean, we did cycle Land's End to John O'Groats together on a tandem. That was quite good fun.
That's
cool. But mostly because we both love climbing, and because we're at a level where it demands so much of your time, we don't really have that much time for other stuff. If I'm honest, but climbing's not just the act of, doing the physical pulling up and stuff. You get to go to these amazing places. We were talking earlier about, we went a couple of years ago to Turkey, and we found ourselves in the middle of nowhere and finding somewhere that says restaurant on it, and it's not a restaurant, it's some guy's front room. You find yourself sat on the floor with the guy that doesn't speak any English. You don't speak any Turkish. That's an experience you'd never get if your holiday was just going to a beach resort.
Absolutely. Diana Maynard's just asking if you've done any Via Fratas, which for people who don't know, there's like it's not typical climbing, is it? It's like bolted ropes at waist height, kind of, isn't it? So you've got a rope. It's a bit like a how do you describe them? Like a rope staircase, isn't it?
So it's basically a way of kind of getting into the mountains and taking away some of the physical aspects of it. So you have a wire that you clip into as a safety line, so that if you slip, you don't fall like to your death. And for the bits which are difficult, they often put like metal rungs into the rock to step on.
Okay.
Have I done any? Not a significant amount. I did a bit when I went to the Dolomites one time, but nothing of any consequence.
It doesn't float your boat because it's not scary enough, is it?
If I'm in a place with Via Ferratas, there's usually climbing, and I usually choose the climbing. Is the answer.
I knew you were going to say that. And then the last question. Oh no, somebody's asking something else just as we type, so we'll pop that one in. So there's two questions. Tara Kennel says, as an absolute beginner who doesn't even know where to start, what would you say to someone thinking about taking up climbing?
When they're open again, find your local climbing wall. I think is probably the best place to start. There are bouldering walls in most kind of large cities now, so it shouldn't be very hard. Go along, and whatever sport you do, I think that if you're keen and willing to learn, you'd be amazed at how helpful people are willing to be.
Great. So find your local climbing wall, Tara. There'll be one that you just never knew was round the corner to you. And the last question is from John Robson, and he says, would you fancy high altitude mountaineering?
Yes and no. Yes, I'd be open to it, but the problem I've always had with high altitude stuff is that you need to have a good chunk of time to acclimatise, and that's not really compatible with having a full-time job.
There is that.
There is that. You can't really dedicate a whole week of your 5 weeks of annual leave to just acclimatising. If at some point in the future I had more free time, then absolutely I'd go and do some stuff in the big mountains. But the necessity to spend some time acclimatising just means that I'd usually choose something else, because you know you want to maximize your time away from the office and doing stuff, and I just don't have enough large blocks of time.
We need to invent the time machine. Well,
Yeah.
Jesse, thank you so much for your time this evening. And thanks to everybody who's tuned in. You can catch up with Jesse on Twitter via @Jesse Dufton, and you can find Climbing Blind. I think it's still on iPlayer, isn't it, Jesse?
Is.
So
It's going to be on iPlayer, so check it out.
yeah, and you can find it on your website, which is jessedufton.com. So please, please, please do go and watch it. It is amazing. And if any of what we've talked about doesn't make sense, it will all make sense when you watch it. And as always, do check out the many Parkrun social media channels in the UK and across the world, as well as subscribing to the various Parkrun podcasts out there. Now, more than ever, it's important that we all come together and support each other. The Parkrun family is there for us all, and we will get through this together. Thank you so much, Jesse, and good luck with your finger strength.
Cheers.
Cheers. Bye.